Welcome to this episode of the Health Hexagon podcast with me, Kevin Hunt. I've decided to do this episode myself today rather than relying on the AI tool I've been using up to now, which was generating a conversational style podcast from articles I've written or extracts from my book, Pain, the Ultimate Mentor. For a variety of reasons, I've decided to do this episode myself as part of managing my own Health Hexagon, which is the point of this podcast, to try and explain how that model of a Health Hexagon helps with our health and well-being for our current and future self. Now, because this is a creative enterprise, I'm taking the philosophy of Rick Rubin, the music producer, who says that if you're doing something creative and you make 5 mistakes, it's not finished. But if you make 8, it just might be. And when he was asked to explain what he meant by that, he said, well, ask yourself the question, why would somebody pay a fortune for an old Persian rug when they could have a factory-made, machine-made, perfect rug for a quarter of the price? But they pay a fortune for the old Persian rug because of its imperfections. Its imperfections give it soul, give it authenticity. This podcast will be far from perfect, but as long as it's got integrity and the soul of the message gets across, then that's what I'm trying to achieve. Up to now, we have had discussions in the podcast around putting boundaries in place for ourselves to manage our health and well-being by trying to register that the ever-connected, constantly on digital world can add stress to our already stressful life, which can also have impact on our health and well-being. We have looked at the impact of the bucket and the hexagon. And I just want to refresh a little bit about the bucket analogy before we go any further. If we imagine ourselves like a bucket, we've got capacity to handle a certain amount of stuff. And we fill and empty that bucket every day at different points of the day, every week, every month, every year. And from time to time, that bucket will overflow. And when that bucket overflows, we will suffer symptoms of some variety. In my world, as a physiotherapist dealing with people with persistent pain, those symptoms are classically going to be a flare-up of back pain, headache, and such things. But that could also be flare-up in anxiety, insomnia, frustration, anger, distress, all sorts of symptoms when our bucket is full. And ultimately, our body is calling us to action to try and empty that bucket in some shape or form. That might be a good night's sleep, it might be to do some exercise, it might be to offload in some way. And that's where the Health Hexagon comes in. The 6 elements of the Health Hexagon to help with our health and well-being. Those 6 elements are sleep, diet, physical load, cognitive load, emotional load, and spiritual offloading. If we take sleep as an example, we all understand that everything is worse with a bad night's sleep. If we have a bad night's sleep, our capacity for tomorrow, in other words, the space available for us in our bucket, will be less. We're likely to be cranky, we're likely to be irritable, we're likely to get more frustrated easier. We may reach for foods that are not necessarily in our long-term interest. We grab sugar, too much caffeine. We won't have as much physical capacity for the day ahead of us. Cognitively, we might not be as sharp or as able to engage with critical thinking. And we may not have the energy or the space to do some of the spiritual offloading that might help get us through our day. And that's just one example with our Health Hexagon, how sleep can have an impact on how quickly our bucket fills or empties. Of course, the opposite is true with a good night's sleep. A good night's sleep, we've more energy for tomorrow, more physical capacity, more mental capacity, more emotional resilience. We have the ability to deploy critical thinking, create space, time, and energy for those offloading activities that we may do, such as hobbies or creativity. So the purpose of this podcast is to help us to understand how our bucket is filling and emptying all the time, how our Health Hexagon can be a tool to discover how we play this game of life for our current and future selves. My purpose as a physiotherapist is to look after the 85-year-old self of the person who comes in to see me, whether that is a person coming in at 20, 30, 40, 50 or beyond. I'm interested in how they interpret their pain signals to be able to guide them towards getting a better balance around filling and emptying the bucket, and also how we use our Health Hexagon to good effect. Today, though, I would like to discuss how we learn things, how the brain manufactures circuits of information to help us navigate the world around us. So I'm going to start by explaining how we learn our colours. As a baby, at some point, your parents would have tried to teach you your colours. This would have been long before you were able to talk, but you would have understood instinctively certain things they were saying. So at some point, they would have put a series of toys in front of you, colourful objects, red, yellow, green, blue, and they would have mixed those toys up and asked you to point at the red one, for instance. And maybe you got lucky. Maybe you pointed at the red one and your parents were incredibly excited and proud and pleased and, oh my God, we've got a genius on our hands. And you didn't know exactly what you did, but you knew you did something right. And you were smiling and feeling positive affirmation. And then your parents would have tested the theory whether you just got lucky or whether you actually know what red is. And they would have mixed the toys up and asked you to point at the red one again. And you, being the clever little baby you are, you probably pointed at the same place you pointed at before, because that was correct. However, this time, you're now pointing at a blue object. And your parents would go, no, that's not red, that's blue. And they may have frowned, or they may have given some sort of negative feedback in their body language or their tone or their behaviour. And this would have probably upset you a little bit as a baby. You would have been unsure, what did I do wrong? I'm not sure. But you would have felt some negative response. And this game would have gone on again and again and again for some time, maybe over hours or days or many weeks perhaps, until eventually you figured out, red is a colour. It's not a place, it's not an object, it's not a shape, it's not a thing, it's an actual colour. And now the penny would drop, so to speak, and you have a circuit of information that connects those pieces of data to create a neurotag for the colour red. And forevermore, when a sensory piece of information, light, reflects off an object and goes into your retina, into your brain, it will elicit the red neurotag if you happen to be seeing the red light frequency. And this neurotag is now hardwired into your brain for your use and at your disposal forevermore. But red is not just a colour. Over time, these neurotags develop complexity. They gather mass. They gather connections with other things. Red is stop. It's danger. It's hot. It's the Chinese flag, Liverpool Football Club, tomato. And all of these independent things have their own neurotags. We've got a neurotag for red, we've got a neurotag for tomato. Put them together, we see a red tomato. But tomatoes aren't just one sort of thing. We can have Roma tomatoes, baby tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, beef tomatoes. We have neurotags for all these things too. So when your brain is trying to make sense of a complex world, it needs pieces of data to pull all these things together. But of course, we have other sorts of tomatoes. We have yellow ones and green ones. So we need distinct pieces of information for each of those things. So you can see across time, these neurotags start to grow more and more and more complex. But also they get related to indirect things. So for instance, you might look at tomato and think salad. Salad might mean the Mediterranean. Mediterranean might mean Italy. Italy might mean Silvio Berlusconi or the Pope. All of these things connected loosely and directly to your understanding of the world. And these neurotags play a very powerful role in how we react with the world. And the same is true of pain. When we're in pain, if we have back pain, for instance, or neck pain, or we injure ourselves in some way, our body is manufacturing these neurotags in real time. It's trying to make sense of threat and danger and predicting the future. And it's trying to put this circuit of information together to help us cope with the world. Now, the tricky thing is, over a period of time, certainly anything beyond 3 months when it comes to injury, those neurotags are now influenced more by the connections that they have gathered over that time, rather than necessarily by being a true representation of tissue harm or tissue damage. And these neurotags will hold on powerfully to negative information when we are under threat. So when we are under threat with something to do with our lifestyle, perhaps our bucket is full, perhaps our Health Hexagon is not living in a sustainable way, that's when we're much more likely to switch on or turn up those negative neurotags. And this happens in life in many, many aspects, in many ways. If we take social media as an example, you could post something on social media, get 100 likes, 1 dislike, and you will focus in on negative information rather than necessarily the 100 likes. And we're hardwired to pay attention to the negative because that's how we survive. Of course, previously we needed to know that rustle in the bushes could have been a tiger to prepare us to flee and to run and to protect ourselves. But it's not always that simple, and especially with pain, these negative pieces of information that we gather around our pain over a lifetime effectively can be triggered and can be hardwired when we are under pressure, we are under stress. And this is what the Health Hexagon and the bucket tries to help us understand. But we use pain as the gateway into registering that actually we are exceeding our capacity or that our Health Hexagon isn't exactly where we need it to be. So this podcast is about exploring these thoughts, exploring these ideas, and understanding that the connections we make through our understanding, through our actions, associations, activities, the narratives we say for ourselves really, really, really matter. But if they need updating, we need a system to help us know they need updating, and that very often is the persistent pain system. So in this podcast, we will explore buckets and hexagons, the purpose of pain, the pain pathway, and more. We will learn from stories of patients who have had success and failure in updating their neurotags to look after their current and future self. So until then, pay attention to your pain-free moments. Pay attention to those sweet spots of your Health Hexagon. Like, share, listen again, or comment on this podcast so we can engage in the conversation of building your Health Hexagon for your current and future self. Thank you for listening.